When we examine the religious practices of Islam and Christianity, one of the most profound areas of overlap is the act of worship, particularly the manner in which believers pray and submit to their Creator. Although these two religions have distinct theological foundations, the physical acts of bowing, prostrating, and worshiping are surprisingly similar, as evidenced by the teachings found in both the Quran and the Bible. In this video, we will delve into these similarities, drawing from specific verses in both religious texts to highlight the commonalities in how worship is conducted. In the Quran, the act of worship is deeply rooted in the concept of submission to Allah. The Quran, chapter 22, verse 77, explicitly instructs believers, "Bow down and prostrate and worship your Lord." This verse is a clear directive for Muslims to engage in physical acts of submission, reflecting humility and reverence before Allah. The act of bowing and prostrating is not just a ritualistic motion, it symbolizes the surrender of one's ego, acknowledging the greatness of Allah and the believer's own subservience. This practice is central to the Islamic prayer, or salah, which is performed 5 times a day. Each time a Muslim prays, they bow and prostrate, physically demonstrating their devotion and submission to Allah. The Bible, while coming from a different religious tradition, shares strikingly similar practices in its depiction of prayer and worship. For instance, in the book of Matthew, chapter 26, verse 39, it is recorded that Jesus fell with his face to the ground and prayed. This act of falling to the ground in prayer mirrors the prostration seen in Islamic worship. It signifies deep humility and a complete surrender to God's will. This method of worship is not unique to Jesus alone. It is a recurring theme throughout the Bible. In Exodus 34 verse 8 we see Moses bowing down to the ground and worshiping. This act of bowing is further reinforced in Genesis 17 verse 3 where Abraham fell face down before God. The act of prostration, bowing down with one's face to the ground, is a physical manifestation of reverence and devotion, seen repeatedly among the prophets in the Bible. Similarly, in Numbers 16 verse 22, both Moses and Aaron are described as falling face down and crying out to their Lord, which highlights a collective act of submission to God's authority. Further biblical references emphasize this act of prostration and humility before God. In Joshua 5 verse 14, Prophet Joshua is described as falling on his face to the earth and worshiping, showing a continuity of this practice among different prophets. This theme continues in 1 Chronicles 29 verse 20, where Prophet David and the assembly prostrated themselves before their Lord, once again showing the communal aspect of worship in the form of bowing and prostration. Nehemiah 8 verse 6 describes Prophet Ezra and his people worshiping God with their faces to the ground, further emphasizing the importance of physical submission in their worship practices. Finally, in Psalms 95 verse 6, the call is made, "Come, let us bow down in worship," which directly invites believers to engage in this act of reverence and submission. The common thread. What becomes evident through these texts is a shared tradition of worship that transcends the boundaries of these two major religions. The physical act of bowing and prostrating is not merely a symbolic gesture but a fundamental expression of devotion and humility that has been passed down through the generations. Both the Quran and the Bible emphasize the importance of physical submission to God as a core component of worship. The prophets in both religious traditions demonstrate this through their actions, setting an example for their followers to emulate. Despite the theological differences between Islam and Christianity, the way in which believers are instructed to approach their Creator with humility and submission is remarkably similar. This commonality suggests a deeper, perhaps universal understanding of how humans should relate to the divine, through acts of worship that involve both body and spirit. So, what religion still commits this act right now? As we've explored, both Islam and Christianity share a deep-rooted tradition of worship that involves bowing, prostrating, and physically demonstrating submission to God. Today, this act of prostration is still a central component of Islamic worship, performed 5 times daily by Muslims around the world. In contrast, while some Christian denominations may still engage in kneeling or bowing during prayer, the practice of full prostration as seen in the Bible is less commonly observed in contemporary Christian worship. This raises an interesting question. If these practices were so integral to the prophets of old, why have they become less prevalent in one tradition and remained central in another? This is something worth pondering as we reflect on the evolution of religious practices over time. So, which religion is the most relevant? What do you think? Give comment below.